NelsonJoypad.com bring you another original. It's fucking great.
You may have been fortunate enough to be gaming during the early 90s, a time of constant advancement and improved sophistication in our games. Sure, they don't look like much now, but at the time, it was good to be alive. Now, just to put this into context, I was born in 1988 and I took my first tentative steps into the gaming world during this golden era. Nostalgia has taken hold and smoothed over many of the rough edges. Looking back, I wasn't really a gamer until a few years later, after the arrival of respawns, save points, and regenerating health. My chubby little prepubescent hands lacked the dexterity that these games demanded, my young mind lacked the processing power to take in my surroundings and make a snap decision, and most importantly, I lacked the patience to get up and start again when I died. So looking back, it's no real surprise that even though I played the odd game, I wasn't really a 90s gamer. Time passed and games have gotten easier and more forgiving with things like memory cards, frequent checkpoints and of course, internet walkthroughs. As I sit here now, a veteran gamer with titles like Mass Effect, Elder Scrolls, Dying Light, Gears of War and more first person shooters that you can shake a stick at under my belt, I felt confident as I watched the retro introduction to Shovel Knight. I could taste the fantastical sense of nostalgia that hit me the instant that I saw the introduction. I had to check my controller to make sure it was still my Xbox One pad and that it hadn't morphed into an old Sega Mega Drive controller. There's something incredibly special about the authentically retro Shovel Knight, but as I began to play I realised that even though it was released in 2015, it was an early 90s game. You play as Shovel Knight. Now he's exactly what the name suggests, a knight who's armed with a shovel. It's a brilliant premise that really sat well with me. Call it what you will, but I liked it. After a tragic event, you confine yourself to exile and a life of solitude. It's not long before everything goes to hell and an evil overlord called the Enchantress has her dark minions making a right mess of the place. And so the journey begins. The basic gameplay boils down to a left to right scroller, but I was impressed with the diversity in each level. There's plenty of secret and hidden areas that provide the dedicated treasure hunter with the chance to explore levels fully. Now to complete each level, Shovel Knight has to navigate platforming sections, tackle a plethora of enemies and other dangers, and after all of that, you have to face off against a boss. Now boss battles are showing a trend of coming back into fashion after a rather long hiatus, but the boss battles in Shovel Knight have the harsh and unforgiving cruelty that my younger self remembers all too well. It's unlikely that you'll defeat each boss the first time you fight them. It took me a couple of lives to learn their moves and tactics, just like it did in the 90s. It may have just been my childish side showing through, but the regular repetition really worked my frustration levels up, and after a few ungentlemanly words, I realised that I may not be as proficient a gamer as I once thought. Shovel Knight hits the early 90s nail on the head, and it absolutely nails the authentic retro feel. It also brings with it some of the problems, and time has not been kind. The combat in Shovel Knight is entirely solid and straightforward. You hit things with the shovel. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The basic moves consist of a horizontal swing and an attack that will damage enemies below you. There's a handful of upgrades that you can purchase using gold that you'll find throughout each level, and the same goes with new armour. There are times in Shovel Knight that the lack of combat control becomes a real problem. During my time playing Shovel Knight, I was never killed by an enemy that wasn't a boss, but I did die a hell of a lot. My demise was usually caused by me falling to my death into a fire pit, a pit of spikes or a bottomless hole after an enemy hit me. When you're hit, unless you have a special set of armour, you'll spring back a few steps or let go of a ladder while climbing. In the early levels that's not a problem, but as the game progresses, I found myself with more and more flying enemies attacking me from the air at an angle that I simply couldn't strike back from. The one concession that Yacht Club Games have made in the creation of Shovel Knight is the inclusion of checkpoints. Each level will have a handful of checkpoints that you can restart from. Each level only has a few of these, so there's no issue with the game becoming too easy. I noticed rather early on that you can crack these checkpoints open in order to get more money. It was only later that I realised, much to my dismay, that if you take this approach it actively destroys the checkpoint. So there's a fantastic element of risk-reward. Shovel Knight takes inspiration from classic games from the 90s like Kirby, Power Blade and Mario. Now you move around the world and enter levels by using a world map that's the spitting image of a Pokemon map. It is delightful. Each level's very well designed, and each new area will throw a new challenge at you. I went from dodging lava falls to navigating a treacherous ice level, and more. It really has the ambience of a retro title, but it holds reasonably well today. I loved the soundtrack to Shovel Knight. It's funky and fitting for the great retro feel of the game. If you want to change the music, then Shovel Knight has you covered. You can pick up music sheets as you explore. It will not only bring a tidy 500 gold, but will also mean that you can select any of these songs to play. It's a minor addition, but one that struck a chord. Shovel Knight is a great retro game. If it had been released 20 years ago, I think it would have fit in perfectly with the games of the time, and I think that Yacht Club Games have succeeded in everything that they set out to accomplish. Gaming has changed in the last 2 decades, and I don't just mean graphics, frames per second or motion capture. The very essence of games has changed from titles that didn't want to be completed and were sadistically difficult to frequent save points and all the help that the developer can provide for you. Shovel Knight is somewhere close to the former. It is difficult but not sadistically so, and it will reward the patient player. I suppose what I'm trying to say is this: do you want an authentically retro game that is as hard as games of the era were, or do you want your handheld? If you feel you need regenerating health and cheat codes, maybe try something else. If you can take a face full of dirt just to spit it out and ask for more, then Shovel Knight might just be the game for you. Shovel Knight is pure, unabridged, retro gaming at its finest. The old school graphics and music offer a great sense of nostalgia, while the fundamental gameplay is excellently solid. Shovel Knight does have some issues during combat and difficult platforming sections that require a few retries. The inclusion of checkpoints is the one concession that takes Shovel Knight out of the 90s and makes it completable for the average gamer. It's a great little game, but don't underestimate it.